The ship came out of faster-than-light travel, and Nathan Price stood at the observation window looking at the planet below. Vareth Prime was beautiful in a cold and alien way. Its surface was covered in silver towers and floating structures that defied human understanding of physics. This was the heart of galactic civilization. This was where the 12 most powerful species in the known universe gathered to decide the fate of entire worlds. Nathan had spent 15 years preparing for this moment. He had learned 7 alien languages. He had studied the customs and protocols of species that had been traveling between stars when humans were still living in caves. He had given up his family and his home, and everything he loved for one purpose. He was going to earn humanity a place among the stars. Admiral Samuel Green walked up beside him. The older man had gray hair and tired eyes, but his uniform was perfect and his back was straight. He had commanded the human fleet for 30 years, and he had volunteered for this mission knowing he might never see Earth again. The journey to Vareth Prime had taken 18 months, and the journey home would take 18 more. Dr. Helen Carter joined them a moment later. She was the finest scientist humanity had ever produced, and she carried datapads containing evidence of every human achievement worth mentioning. Art and music and literature and scientific discoveries and philosophical breakthroughs. Everything that proved humans were worthy of respect. The 3 of them represented the best humanity had to offer. They had been chosen from billions of candidates. They had trained together for years. They were ready, or so they believed. The shuttle descended through the silver clouds and landed on a platform that seemed to be made of solid light. Alien beings of every shape and size moved around them as they walked toward the great assembly hall. Some had too many limbs. Some had no limbs at all. Some floated through the air and some crawled along the walls. Nathan kept his eyes forward and his expression calm. The assembly chamber was larger than any building on Earth. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness, and the walls curved around in a perfect circle that could hold thousands of beings. At the center was a raised platform where petitioners could address the council. Around that platform sat the representatives of the 12 ruling species. Nathan recognized them from his studies. The Valori were beings of pure light and energy, who had existed for millions of years. The Kethari were massive insectoid creatures with armored bodies and razor-sharp mandibles. The Morvani were shapeshifters who could become anything they wished. The Jalan were a collective consciousness that spoke with one voice from many bodies. And there were 8 others whose names and forms Nathan had memorized long ago. The Valori High Speaker glowed brighter as the humans approached. His name was Valorath, and he had ruled this council for 3,000 years. His voice echoed through the chamber without any visible source. "You may speak, little ones." Nathan stepped onto the central platform. He took a deep breath, and he began. He spoke for 3 hours without stopping. He told the council about human history. He described the wars they had fought and the peace they had built. He explained their science and their art and their dreams for the future. He showed them images of Earth with its blue oceans and green forests. He played recordings of human music that brought tears to even alien eyes. He quoted human philosophers and poets and leaders who had imagined this very moment. He spoke with passion and conviction and absolute sincerity. He asked for nothing more than a chance to prove that humanity belonged among the stars, a chance to contribute to galactic civilization, a chance to learn and grow alongside species that had so much to teach. When he finished, there was silence in the chamber. And then the laughter began. It started with the Valori High Speaker. His form flickered and pulsed in a way that Nathan eventually recognized as amusement. Then the Kethari delegate began clicking his mandibles in a rapid pattern that meant mockery in their culture. The Morvani representative shifted into a dozen different shapes, each one more ridiculous than the last. Even the Jalan collective made a sound like wind through dead leaves that passed for laughter among their kind. The entire council was laughing at humanity. Nathan stood perfectly still. His face showed nothing. Beside him, Helen gripped her datapad so tightly her knuckles turned white. Samuel kept his hand away from the ceremonial sidearm at his hip through sheer force of will. The High Speaker's voice cut through the noise. "You crawled out of mud only 400,000 years ago. Your species still fights over patches of dirt and imaginary lines on maps. You have no telepathy and no natural weapons and no exoskeletons and no special abilities of any kind. Your bodies are soft and fragile, and they break so easily. Your minds cannot even communicate without making sounds with your mouths like animals. The Kethari delegate leaned forward. His compound eyes reflected Nathan's image 1,000 times. Your lifespans are a joke. You grow old and weak and die before you can learn anything of value. A human who lives 100 years is considered ancient among your kind. I have soldiers who are older than your entire civilization. The Morvani representative took on a human form just to mock them. She made herself look old and bent and feeble. This is what you become after only a few decades. How can you expect to contribute anything when you barely have time to understand the universe before you rot away? Nathan found his voice. We ask only for the chance to prove ourselves. The high speaker dimmed slightly as if the very idea bored him. Return to your little world, humans. The galaxy has no need for creatures so limited and so brief. This council will not waste time considering your application for another 100 years. Perhaps by then you will have evolved into something worth noticing. Perhaps you will have developed telepathy or learned to extend your pitiful lifespans or grown some natural defenses. Until then you are dismissed. The word echoed through the chamber. Dismissed. As if humanity was nothing more than an annoying insect to be waved away. Nathan bowed his head slightly. He turned and walked toward the exit with Samuel and Helen beside him. The laughter followed them all the way to the door. They did not speak on the shuttle ride back to their ship. They did not speak as they prepared for the long journey home, but as the stars stretched into lines around them and Verith Prime disappeared behind them, Samuel Green finally broke the silence. They will regret this. Nathan shook his head slowly. Regret requires respect, Admiral. They do not even consider us worthy of hatred. We are nothing to them. Less than nothing. We are a joke. Helen looked up from her data pads. Her eyes were dry, but her voice was hard. Then we will have to change their minds. Nathan turned to face the stars ahead. Every word of that assembly had been broadcast back to Earth. 9 billion humans had watched their representatives be mocked and dismissed like children. 9 billion humans had heard the laughter. And 9 billion humans would remember. The transmission reached Earth 3 months before the diplomatic ship returned home. 9 billion people watched the council laugh at their representatives. 9 billion people heard the insults and the mockery and the dismissal. Parents watched with their children. Workers watched in factories and offices. Soldiers watched in bases across the planet and on the 17 colony worlds that humanity had established. No one spoke about it publicly. There were no protests, and no angry speeches, and no calls for revenge. The governments of Earth released a simple statement saying that humanity would continue to develop peacefully and would seek diplomatic solutions to galactic integration. The statement was calm and measured and completely meaningless, because something else was happening beneath the surface. When Nathan Price finally returned to Earth, he was greeted not by crowds or media but by a single car that took him to an underground facility that did not officially exist. Inside that facility, he found the leaders of every major nation sitting around a table waiting for him. They asked him one question. What do we need? Nathan told them everything. He described the technology he had seen on Verith Prime. He explained the abilities of each council species. He outlined their weaknesses and their arrogance, and their absolute certainty that humanity could never be a threat. The leaders listened without interruption. When Nathan finished, they looked at each other, and then they looked at him. You have 100 years, Ambassador Price. That is how long until the council will consider us again. Use that time well. Nathan nodded. He understood what they were asking. He understood what humanity was about to become. Dr. Helen Carter became the head of a project so secret that only a handful of people knew its true purpose. She gathered the greatest scientists from every nation, and she told them one simple truth. Everything we know about physics and biology and technology is wrong. The council species have proven that. Our job is to figure out what is right. They worked in hidden facilities on Earth and on the Moon and on stations floating in the darkness between planets. They studied every piece of alien technology humanity had ever encountered. They analyzed every transmission they could intercept from council space. They experimented and failed and experimented again. The first breakthrough came after 15 years. A young physicist named Daniel Park discovered that space was not empty, but filled with something he called fold energy. This energy could be manipulated to bend space itself. A ship using fold energy would not travel through space but would simply move space around itself. The journey to Varath Prime that had taken 18 months could be completed in 18 hours. Helen Carter wept when she saw the results. She was old now and her hands shook and her eyes were failing, but her mind was still sharp. She promoted Daniel to lead the propulsion division and she moved on to the next problem. The second breakthrough came after 23 years. A biologist named Maria Santos figured out how to stop human cells from aging. The treatment was complex and expensive, but it worked. Humans who received it would live for centuries instead of decades. They would remain strong and healthy and sharp-minded for hundreds of years. Admiral Samuel Green was one of the first to receive the treatment. He was 87 years old, and he had been waiting to die, but now he would live to see what humanity would become. He took command of a new division called Silent Fleet, and he began planning for a war that might never come. The third breakthrough came after 41 years. A team of engineers created a material they called shadow steel. It was harder than anything the Council species possessed. It could absorb energy weapons and reflect kinetic impacts and repair itself when damaged. But more importantly, it could bend light and radiation around itself, making anything covered in it completely invisible to every known form of detection. Helen Carter died 6 months after shadow steel was perfected. She was 112 years old, and she had refused the life extension treatment because she said the young needed to lead the future. Her daughter Catherine took over the project, and she proved to be even more brilliant than her mother. The fourth breakthrough came after 67 years. Catherine Carter and her team cracked the secret of the Violori. They learned how the beings of light communicated and how they controlled energy and how they could be disrupted. They created devices that could block telepathy and cancel transformation abilities and neutralize every special power the Council species possessed. The fleet grew in the shadows. Shipyards hidden in asteroid fields and gas giant moons produced vessels unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They were fast and silent and deadly. They carried weapons that could crack planets and shields that could stop stars. And they were crewed by humans who had trained their entire lives for one purpose. By the 70th year, humanity had spread to 42 worlds. The population had grown to 30 billion. And every single one of them knew why they were working so hard. Every child learned the story of the council chamber. Every adult carried the memory of the laughter. But they did not hate. Hatred was loud and wasteful and obvious. Instead, they felt something colder and more patient. They felt determination. The final breakthrough came after 93 years. A young commander named Lisa Howard led a test mission to the border of Council space. Her ship, the Quiet Resolve, was equipped with every advancement humanity had made. She took it within scanning range of a Vailori patrol station, and she held position for 6 hours. The Vailori never detected her. Their most advanced sensors saw nothing but empty space. Lisa Howard and her crew sat in silence, watching the aliens go about their business, completely unaware that death was close enough to touch. She reported back to Admiral Green, who was now 180 years old and still sharp as a blade. "We are ready, sir." Green nodded slowly. He thought about Nathan Price, who had died peacefully 20 years ago, still believing that humanity would find its place among the stars. He thought about Helen Carter, who had given her life to this project. He thought about all the humans who had worked and sacrificed and waited for this moment. "Almost," he said. "We have 7 more years. Let us use them well." In the council chamber on Varath Prime, the Galactic Assembly continued to meet and argue and make decisions that shaped the fate of billions. They had forgotten about the humans. A century was nothing to species that lived for millennia. The little creatures from the third planet of an unremarkable star had faded from memory like a bad joke that was no longer funny. They had no idea what was coming. The year was 2447. 100 years had passed since humanity stood before the Galactic Assembly and asked for a chance to prove themselves. 100 years since the Council laughed and sent them away like beggars from a rich man's door. 100 years of silence from the little species on the edge of known space. On Varath Prime, the assembly chamber was full once again. Representatives from the 12 ruling species had gathered to discuss matters of great importance. Trade disputes between the Kethari and the Morvani had grown heated. The Gelan collective wanted to expand into territory claimed by the Vailori. Border conflicts and resource rights and ancient grudges filled the agenda. No one mentioned the humans. Most of the delegates had not even been alive when the human delegation visited. Those who remembered considered it a minor footnote in galactic history. A brief amusement quickly forgotten. High Speaker Velarath opened the session with traditional words of welcome. He was the grandson of the speaker who had dismissed humanity, and he had inherited his ancestors' arrogance, along with his position. His crystalline form glowed with authority as he called the assembly to order. The Cathari delegate began presenting his grievances against the Morvani. His voice was harsh, and his mandibles clicked with barely contained aggression. The Morvani representative shifted forms rapidly, showing her displeasure. Arguments erupted across the chamber as old alliances and older hatreds rose to the surface. And then the lights went out. Every system on Verath Prime failed at the same moment. The assembly chamber plunged into absolute darkness. Emergency power did not activate. Backup systems did not respond. Communication networks went silent. Defensive satellites stopped transmitting. The entire planet had gone dark. The council species were not accustomed to darkness. Many of them had never experienced true darkness in their entire lives. Panic spread through the chamber as delegates tried to activate personal devices and found them dead. The Vylori tried to generate their own light, but something was suppressing their energy. The Kethari guards tried to contact their hive mind, but the connection was blocked. The Morvani tried to shift into forms with better senses, but their bodies would not respond. For 3 minutes, the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat helpless in the dark. Then the lights returned. The chamber looked exactly as it had before. The walls still curved in their perfect circle. The ceiling still rose into shadowy heights. The platform at the center still waited for petitioners to speak, but the center of the chamber was no longer empty. 100 humans stood in perfect formation on the assembly floor. They wore armor, the color of a starless void. They carried no visible weapons. They made no sound at all. They had simply appeared as if they had always been there. At their head stood a woman with gray eyes and short dark hair. Her name was Lisa Howard, and she had been preparing for this moment for 50 years. She was 102 years old, but she looked no older than 30. Her face showed no emotion. Her body was perfectly still. The humans did not move. They did not speak. They simply stood and waited. High Speaker Valorath's form blazed with outrage. His voice thundered through the chamber. "How dare you infiltrate this sacred place? Guards, remove these creatures immediately." The Valori guards rushed forward with energy weapons raised. They were elite soldiers trained for thousands of years. They had never failed to protect the assembly. Lisa Howard raised one hand. It was a small gesture, almost casual. She did not even look at the guards. The guards stopped. Their weapons powered down without command. Their limbs locked in place. They remained fully conscious and fully aware, but they could not move a single muscle. They stood frozen like statues while terror filled their ancient eyes. The chamber erupted in chaos. The Kethari delegate tried to summon warriors from his hive through telepathic command. Nothing happened. The connection was dead. The Morvani ambassador attempted to trigger her combat transformation. Her body refused to change. The Jalan collective tried to merge into their war form. The link between their bodies had been severed. Every special ability that the council species possessed had been neutralized. Every advantage they had used to dominate the galaxy for 50,000 years was gone. They were helpless, and they knew it. Lisa Howard finally spoke. Her voice was calm and clear, and it carried to every corner of the massive chamber, without any amplification. 100 years ago, our ambassador stood on this platform and asked for the chance to prove humanity worthy of respect. You laughed at him. You called us fragile and brief and useless. You told us to come back when we had evolved into something worth noticing. She paused and let the silence stretch. We have returned. The Kethari delegate found his voice. His words came out as a harsh whisper. This is impossible. You cannot be here. Our sensors detected nothing. Our defenses registered no intrusion. Lisa nodded slightly. Your sensors are excellent. They can detect a single molecule of foreign matter from 1,000 kilometers away. They can track the heat signature of a living creature through solid rock. They can identify the energy output of any ship ever built by any species in this galaxy. She took one step forward. The humans behind her moved in perfect unison, taking one step as well, but they cannot detect us. We learned how to become invisible to every form of scanning technology your species possess. We learned how to fold space so that distance means nothing. We learned how to block your telepathy and cancel your transformations and neutralize your energy manipulation. High Speaker Valorath dimmed with something that might have been fear. His voice was no longer thunderous. What do you want? Lisa Howard looked up at him with those gray, unreadable eyes. We want you to understand something. We want you to understand that you were wrong about us. We are not fragile. We are not brief. We are not useless. We are what happens when you give a determined species 100 years and a reason to prove themselves. She raised her hand again, and the great display screen behind the council activated. It showed images that made even the oldest delegates gasp with shock. Every major world belonging to the council species was visible on that screen. Vialori Prime with its crystal cities, the Kethari homeworld with its endless hives, the Morvani breeding grounds, the Gellan network nodes, all of them, and above each planet hung a human ship. The vessels had been invisible until this moment. Now they revealed themselves deliberately. They were sleek and dark, and utterly alien to council eyes. They bristled with weapons that the assembled delegates could not even identify. There are 4,712 human ships currently positioned throughout council space. Lisa Howard's voice remained perfectly calm. They have been in position for 6 months. You never knew we were here. The silence that followed was the loudest thing the assembly had ever heard. The council chamber remained silent as the delegates stared at the screen. 4,712 ships. 6 months undetected. Every major world in council space held hostage by a species they had dismissed as insignificant. High Speaker Valorath tried to regain control of the situation. His form flickered rapidly as he processed what he was seeing. This is an act of war. You will be destroyed for this aggression. The combined might of 12 species will crush your little fleet and burn your worlds to ash. Lisa Howard did not react to the threat. She simply gestured at the screen again. The image changed. Now it showed a detailed analysis of every military asset the council species possessed. Fleet positions and patrol routes, and defense networks and weapon capabilities. All of it laid out in perfect detail. We know everything about your military forces. Lisa's voice remained steady. We have spent 100 years studying you. We know how your ships move and how your weapons work and where your defenses are weak. We know the communication frequencies your commanders use and the codes that activate your planetary shields. We know things about your own militaries that you have forgotten. The Kethari delegate made a sound of disbelief. His compound eyes reflected the images on the screen. You are bluffing. No species could gather this much intelligence without being detected. Lisa turned to look at him directly. Your hive world has 17 major military installations. The largest is located beneath the northern breeding grounds and houses 32,000 warrior drones. The commander is called Krixtal, and he lost his left forelimb in the border war with the Morvani 600 years ago. He replaced it with a prosthetic made from the shell of a fallen enemy. He considers it his greatest trophy. The Kethari delegate went completely still. That information was classified at the highest level. Only members of the royal caste were supposed to know such details. The Morvani ambassador shifted nervously. Her form kept trying to change, but the dampening field held her in place. What do you want from us? If this is about the insults from a century ago, we can offer formal apologies. We can provide compensation. Name your price. Lisa shook her head slowly. We did not come here for apologies. We did not come here for money or territory or revenge. We came here to show you what you failed to see 100 years ago. She turned in a slow circle, addressing all 12 species at once. You measured us by the wrong standards. You looked at our bodies and saw that we had no natural armor and no built-in weapons and no special abilities. You looked at our lifespans and saw that we lived only a few decades while you lived for centuries or millennia. You concluded that we were inferior, that we could never catch up to species so much older and more powerful. She stopped and faced High Speaker Valorath. But you never measured what actually matters. You never measured our determination, our creativity, our ability to learn and adapt and overcome. You never measured our patience. Admiral Samuel Green watched from the command deck of the Quiet Resolve in orbit above Verath Prime. The old warrior was 220 years old now. The life extension treatment had kept his body strong, but his eyes had seen too much death to ever look young again. Beside him stood Daniel Carter, the grandson of Helen Carter, and the current head of human military research. "She is doing well," Daniel said quietly. Green nodded. "She had good teachers. Her grandmother would be proud." In the chamber below, Lisa Howard continued her demonstration. She made another gesture, and one of the human soldiers stepped forward. He was a young man named Peter Walsh, and he had volunteered for what came next. He removed his helmet, revealing a face that looked entirely human. Then he held out his hand. His skin rippled and changed. Metal flowed from beneath the surface, forming a blade that extended from his forearm. The blade glowed with contained energy. It was sharper than any Kethari mandible, and stronger than any Morvani combat form. Peter flexed his arm and the blade retracted. His skin returned to normal. "We have improved ourselves," Lisa said. "Not through mutation or evolution, but through engineering. Every soldier you see here has been enhanced in ways that your species cannot detect. We are faster and stronger and more durable than baseline humans. We can survive in vacuum, and we can see in complete darkness, and we can heal from wounds that would kill any of your warriors." The Jalan Collective spoke for the first time. Its voice came from dozens of bodies at once, creating an eerie chorus. "You have made yourselves into weapons. This is exactly what we feared from younger species. You will use this power to conquer and destroy." Lisa turned to face the collective. She was silent for a long moment before she responded. "No." The single word hung in the air. "We did not develop this technology to conquer. We developed it to survive. We developed it because you gave us no choice. When the galaxy tells you that you are worthless and weak, you have two options. You can accept that judgment and fade into extinction, or you can prove them wrong." She walked toward the council platform. The guards who had been frozen in place were released. They stumbled backward in fear as she passed. "We have 4,000 ships above your worlds right now. We have weapons that could crack your planets open like eggs. We have soldiers who could fight through your defenses without breaking stride. We could begin a war that would reshape the galaxy." She stopped at the base of the platform and looked up at the assembled council. "But we choose not to." The Valori High Speaker flickered with confusion. He had expected threats, and demands, and ultimatums. He had not expected this. "Then why are you here? What is the purpose of this demonstration, if not to threaten us into submission?" Lisa Howard smiled for the first time since she had entered the chamber. It was not a warm smile, but it was genuine. "We are here to deliver a message. We are here to show you what humanity has become. And we are here to give you a choice." She raised her voice so that every delegate could hear clearly. "In 1 month, the Galactic Assembly will vote on whether to accept humanity as a full member species. This time we expect the vote to go differently. This time we expect you to consider our application with respect." High Speaker Valoreth's form pulsed with indignation. "You cannot dictate terms to this council. We have governed the galaxy for 50,000 years." Lisa nodded calmly. "Yes, you have. And in all that time, has any species ever demonstrated this level of advancement in a single century? Has any species ever infiltrated your space so completely without being detected? Has any species ever stood before you and proven you wrong so thoroughly?" She let the questions hang in the air. "We are not asking you to surrender. We are not asking you to bow down. We are asking you to acknowledge that you made a mistake. We are asking you to give us what we asked for 100 years ago. A seat at the table. A chance to participate." She turned and walked back toward her soldiers. "You have 1 month to decide. Choose wisely." Part 5, The New Order. The human soldiers turned as one unit and walked toward the chamber doors. Their footsteps made no sound on the polished floor. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, as if controlled by a single mind. Lisa Howard led them without looking back. The council delegates watched in stunned silence. No one tried to stop them. No one called out threats or demands. They simply watched as the beings they had once mocked walked away with complete confidence. High Speaker Valoreth found his voice as the doors began to close. "Wait," How do we contact you? How do we communicate our decision? Lisa paused at the threshold. She turned her head slightly but did not fully face the council. You do not need to contact us. We will know. The doors closed behind her. A moment later, the lights in the chamber flickered once, and every system returned to normal. The guards regained full control of their bodies. The telepathic links reconnected. The transformation abilities resumed functioning. Everything was exactly as it had been before the humans arrived. Except everything had changed. On the quiet Resolve, Admiral Green watched the human shuttles return from the planet's surface. Lisa Howard was the last to board. She removed her helmet and ran a hand through her sweat-dampened hair. The mission was complete, but she did not look relieved. She looked tired. Well done, Commander, Green said as she entered the bridge. Lisa shook her head. This was the easy part, Admiral. Now we wait and see if they are wise enough to accept the truth. Daniel Carter pulled up a display showing the entire human fleet. 4,712 ships held position throughout Council space. They could remain invisible indefinitely. They could strike at any moment. But that was not the plan. What if they refuse? Daniel asked. What if they decide to call our bluff and reject our application again? Admiral Green was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of 2 centuries. Then we will have to decide what kind of species we want to be. Whether we are conquerors or something else entirely. But I do not believe it will come to that. Below, on Verith Prime, the council chamber had erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted at each other in a dozen languages. The Kethari accused the Vialori of failing to detect the human infiltration. The Morvani blamed the Jelan for not foreseeing this development through their collective consciousness. Ancient alliances fractured as fear and anger overwhelmed reason. High Speaker Velarath tried to restore order, but his authority had been shattered. He had stood helpless while aliens walked into his sacred chamber and demonstrated that his species was not as powerful as they believed. His form flickered and dimmed as the reality of the situation sank in. The humans had won without firing a single shot. 1 week passed. Human ships remained in position, but they took no aggressive action. They simply waited and watched as the council species descended into panic. Military forces scrambled to find ways to detect the invisible fleet. Scientists worked desperately to understand the technology that had neutralized their abilities. Politicians argued over how to respond. 2 weeks passed. The panic began to subside as the council realized that the humans were not attacking. They were doing exactly what they had promised. They were waiting for a decision. Some delegates began to argue that perhaps the humans should be given what they asked for. Others insisted that accepting would be a sign of weakness that could never be recovered from. 3 weeks passed. Intelligence reports came in from across council space. The human fleet had not moved. They had not threatened any civilian populations. They had not interfered with trade or communications. They were simply present. A silent reminder that humanity was watching. Admiral Green received regular updates on the council deliberations. The debates had grown less heated as time went on. The delegates were beginning to accept that they had underestimated humanity. They were beginning to understand that the old order had already ended whether they admitted it or not. 1 month after the demonstration, the Galactic Assembly convened to vote on humanity's application for membership. The chamber was full again, but the atmosphere was different this time. The arrogance was gone. The laughter was gone. The delegates sat in their places with the quiet solemnity of beings facing a moment of historic change. High Speaker Velarath called for the vote. His voice was steady but subdued. One by one, the 12 species cast their decisions. The Kethari voted yes. The Morvani voted yes. The Jelan Collective voted yes with all of its component minds in agreement. Species that had dominated the galaxy for millennia voted to accept newcomers who had arrived only yesterday by cosmic standards. When the final vote was tallied, the result was unanimous. 12 votes in favor. 0 against. Humanity was now a member of the Galactic Assembly. The doors of the chamber opened, and a single human walked in. She was tall, with dark hair and eyes that carried the weight of generations. Her name was Catherine Price, and she was the granddaughter of Nathan Price, who had stood on this same platform 100 years ago and asked for nothing more than a chance. She walked to the center of the chamber, and took her place among the council. She did not gloat or boast or remind them of their ancestors' mockery. She simply sat down, folded her hands, and waited for the next item on the agenda. On the quiet resolve, Admiral Green watched the ceremony through a direct feed. Tears ran down his weathered cheeks, but he made no move to wipe them away. Beside him, Lisa Howard stood at attention. Daniel Carter sat at his station monitoring the fleet. "It is done," Green said softly. "Nathan would have been proud," Lisa nodded. "So would Helen. And Catherine. And everyone who worked and sacrificed for this moment." Green turned to address the bridge crew. "Signal the fleet. All ships are to stand down and withdraw to designated holding positions. We are no longer a threat. We are partners now." The order went out across the void. 4,712 ships received it simultaneously. They acknowledged and began to move. The silent fleet that had held the galaxy hostage faded back into the darkness from which it had come, but they did not go far. They would never go far again. In the council chamber, the assembly continued with its regular business. Trade disputes and border conflicts and resource allocations. The same matters that had occupied them for 50,000 years. But now there was a 13th voice in the debates, a human voice. Catherine Price listened and learned and contributed where she could. She was patient and respectful and thoughtful. She did not demand special treatment or expect immediate influence. She simply did her job. Years passed. The human presence in the council grew stronger as more delegates and advisors joined Catherine. They brought perspectives and ideas that the older species had never considered. They asked questions that had never been asked. They proposed solutions that had never been tried. The galaxy began to change, not through conquest or domination, but through partnership. Humanity shared their technological advances with species willing to work alongside them. They opened trade routes and established cultural exchanges. They proved that strength and cooperation were not opposites. Admiral Green lived another 100 years before finally allowing himself to rest. He died peacefully, surrounded by the descendants of the soldiers who had served under him. His last words were a message for humanity. "We proved them wrong. Now prove me right. Be better than they feared." Lisa Howard became the first human to command a joint species peacekeeping force. Daniel Carter's children continued their great-grandmother's legacy of scientific discovery. Catherine Price served on the council for 200 years, before retiring to write a history of human galactic integration. And somewhere in the archives of Verith Prime, the recording of the original human delegation remained. Historians would study it for centuries. They would analyze Nathan Price's speech and the council's dismissive laughter. They would marvel at how quickly everything had changed, but they would always return to one moment. The moment when 100 humans walked into the most powerful assembly in the galaxy and stood in complete silence. The moment when humanity spoke loudest by saying nothing at all. The galaxy had learned a lesson that day. A lesson about patience and determination, and the danger of underestimating those you consider beneath you. Humanity had walked forth in silence, and the silence had changed everything.